All right. If you'll just start off by stating your name and your title, please, for us.
My name is Dr. Kitty Smith. Actually, I was born and named Mary Catherine, but once I got into the professional arena, it seemed that Kitty just stuck, my nickname, and I go by Kitty Smith now.
And you are a pastor, am I correct?
Yes, I pastor Oak Grove Baptist Church, which is in Buckingham County, Virginia.
Great, great. So, Dr. Smith, so you are currently a practicing pastor. When did you, I guess the best way to put it, hear your calling? When did you hear your calling to go into the ministry? And what made you decide to go and do that?
I would say that I felt a spiritual pull back in the mid-1970s. I was an equal opportunity specialist, and I traveled around the country presenting workshops. And on one of my trips home from, I think it was Denver, I was reading a book. The name of the book was, Is There Family in the House? My husband was a native of Charlotte County, Virginia. His desire was to leave Baltimore, my home, and come back here. And I wasn't doing that. But in reading that book, I had an incredible experience, spiritual experience, so intense that I began to weep, and it caused my fellow passengers as well as the staff to think I was afraid of flying. But I was so convicted by my resistance to coming to this area. And later, within, I say, a month, I realized it was a divine experience of, okay, you're not going to go into ministry here in Baltimore. You're too comfortable here. You're too well known in a different kind of profession. So I'm going to take you to a whole new environment. So that was the beginning of my awareness that I was going to be going into ministry.
So you come back here. So when did you relocate?
Came here in 1983. And I'd never lived anywhere but Baltimore. Yes.
What was that kind of like, that shock, that culture shock?
It definitely was culture shock. But it was also exciting. My parents were from a rural area of North Carolina, so I understood Southern rural living, but only from the standpoint of being a visitor. This was a whole new dynamic, leaving family, friends, everything to come into a new setting. And it was almost, when I compared it to a story in scripture where God tells someone, come out from among them. In other words, I had done everything he wanted me to do in Baltimore. I'd gotten the training he wanted me to get in Baltimore. Now he's saying, I'm sending you forth. I did not realize totally that's what was going on. But in retrospect, that's exactly what happened.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny how divine intervention, like, you know,
yes.
how little things may look like one thing, but, you know, looking back, it's like, wow, this is supposed to happen, right? That's really interesting to think about. So 1983, you said you relocated?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you've been here pretty much ever since.
Exactly, yes.
So when did you take over or were there other churches before Oak Grove?
Actually, I joined what's now called Jericho Baptist. At that time, it was Race Street Baptist Church, and acknowledged officially the call to ministry there at Race Street. And Dr. Taylor, the pastor there, after he ordained me, appointed me minister of Christian education there at Ray Street.
And after that,
And not too long after that, a couple of years, my name was submitted by some members of Oak Grove when they were looking for a pastor. And of course, they'd never had a woman. But I am told that when my name was put on the list, I was accepted totally.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
It is.
So you mentioned, and I think that's important for us to talk about a little bit, but they never had a woman, a female pastor before.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What has this whole experience, in getting ordained, and getting a doctorate, like what has this whole experience been like as a female of color, as a Black woman? What has that experience been like for you?
It has been exasperating at times, enlightening at times, also exciting because I recognize that on some level I was a groundbreaker, a pioneer. In the African American community, there have been women preachers. Scripturally, there have been women who have carried the word, not necessarily called preachers or pastors, but profound women in Scripture. But within many of our African American churches, there was teaching that women, number one, were not supposed to be leaders of men, and number two, women definitely were not supposed to preach. And three, under no circumstances was a woman to be a pastor. So, for me to find myself in that in that setting was extraordinary, to say the least. Coming from a long line of pastors. My dad was a pastor. Two of my brothers are pastors. A lot of cousins are pastors. But I'm the only woman, even in my family, a huge family. I just like to throw this out because it shocks people when I say I have 17 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
Yeah, see, I usually get that wow.
My dad is one of 9, so I'm used to semi-large. But I think my grandmother was one of like 16, so you got her beat too. Wow, 17 brothers and sisters, that's something. But you're the only female who went on to be a pastor.
Yes, yes.
Do many of them have doctorate degrees as well?
Both of my brothers, yes, they have their doctorates. One obtained his doctorate from Howard University. And I think my younger brother, James, his may have also come from Howard University, yes.
When and where did you complete your degree?
Here in Virginia, Virginia University Lynchburg Seminary, historic school. Very proud of that school. Yeah. They
are a pretty great school. I had a chance to go and do some programs on a couple of occasions.
Yes.
They have certainly grown over the years as well.
Yeah.
You have a really interesting dissertation topic that I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about.
I decided after years of working in the equal employment opportunity field, and of course I've been in church all my life, and trying to bring the two together, almost asking God, why am I an equal opportunity specialist and at the same time so involved in religious affairs? I'll use that term. And I had this awakening, and it literally woke me up. Racial reconciliation. And what really caused me to focus on that was reading something by Bishop Desmond Tutu, and also Nelson Mandela echoed it. There can be no progress without forgiveness. And just looking at our history as a race of people and as a nation, all of these years we've been trying to deal with issues of racism. And it seems that we go a little bit ahead and then something happens and we find ourselves starting all over again. And this has been going on for years. And as I began to really focus on this whole issue of race relations, I finally got it, because Scripture says that we have to forgive those who despitefully use us. Scripture makes it very clear that until we're able to forget, we're kind of stuck in that position, you know. And any one of us growing up, especially if we had an old-fashioned mom, brothers and sisters having an argument, fighting, you know, at home, and you were told, all right, now tell your brother you're sorry, or tell your sister you're sorry, you know. And until that happened, even as children, there would be that tension in the air. But once we were able to say, I'm sorry, or I forgive you, or something along those lines, once we say that, things kind of calm down and we're able to move forward. When I look at race relations here in the United States, it's very clear to me that African Americans who are justified in feeling anger, frustration over what happened, brought here against our will, enslaved, all of that sort of thing, I will never ever minimize that. Sure. But at what point are we going to say, all right, I forgive you? Because until we're able to do that, it's amazing how that feeling of anger will surface. No matter how successful we are, no matter how wonderful everything is, there will be something that will happen that will trigger that sense of outrage, anger. You might be looking at something on television, or you're reading the newspaper, and all of a sudden, all of that comes back because we have not been really delivered. And until we are delivered from that feeling of anger, hatred almost, and frustration, we are still captive. In a sense, we're still in slavery.
Sure.
You know.
Definitely see that notion.
Yes, yes.
And your dissertation topic is, double, I think.
My dissertation topic, and really, believe me, when I announced it in the class, everybody looked at me like I had 10 heads. Racial reconciliation, a 21st century challenge for clergy, especially in the African American community. I even had a symposium here at Mote Museum. I pulled together African American clergy for a weekend's workshop on racial reconciliation. And I scheduled it for after I attended a symposium at Duke University on racial reconciliation. I had local clergy come here for 3 days. It was a weekend event. And we talked about race relations, our experiences. And I capped it off with each minister having to put together a sermon on racial forgiveness. I began the event by asking them, had they ever preached a sermon on forgiving whites or forgiving the slave owners, anything along those lines. Nobody ever had. And yet, Sunday after Sunday, from our pulpits, we preach love, forgiveness. That's the entire premise of Christianity. You know, loving your enemies, forgiving those who misuse you or, you know, mistreat you. But none of us had ever preached a sermon on that. So we spent the 3 days discussing it. And I want you to know some of the sermons that they produced as the final assignment was absolutely incredible. There were I think there were about 13, 14 who participated. And it was funded by a grant from a humanities grant from Virginia, oh goodness, in Charlottesville.
Virginia Humanities?
Yeah. So it was thrilling. It was an incredible experience, I think, for everyone who attended.
Right. So I guess that brings forth one question, which I don't feel like you have to read your whole dissertation to answer. But like, how do we use faith in, the institution of Christianity as a mechanism to drive racial reconciliation? And then I guess a thing to tack onto that, like, what happens after, let's just stick with that one first. Never mind, I'm doing too much. How do we use kind of faith in Christian beliefs and ideals to drive racial healing and reconciliation?
I think, of course, it begins with, it does begin in the church with the pastor emphasizing when he teaches that we have to forgive our brothers. Like I said, there's a passage of scripture, forgive those who despitefully use you. Well, the pastor has to emphasize that means everybody. You got to do that. We have to start by teaching our children. It starts at home. And assuming that home also includes a certain amount of church and Christian teaching, then we have to make sure we teach that to our kids. One of the things I try to emphasize with the churches I come in contact with is the importance of Bible study, not just a routine glance or Sunday school 30-minute, but I mean really getting into Bible study, because there's so many African Americans who do not realize that many of the individuals who are cited in scripture are black folk. They're people of color. Many don't understand that those tribes come out of Africa. It was just overlooked. And so I think we have to start by building up our own sense of who we are and how God has used us down through the ages to do incredible things. And then, of course, we have to be comfortable in our own skin. So comfortable that we don't make apologies for our skin color. In our history, blacks did a lot of discriminating toward each other.
Colorism, absolutely.
Yes. And it's one of those things that's glossed over. And I think we've reached a time when my mother used to say, in order to really clean a room, you got to tear it apart. You just got to pull out everything, make sure you get it clean. So I think that it's time for us as a group of people to, as we are identifying everything that white America did to us, we need to also acknowledge what we did to ourselves and to each other.
Sure.
I am a AKA, and there were colleges, sororities and fraternities on the different campuses. The color of your skin determined what sorority or fraternity you were accepted by. That's crazy. And so we need to acknowledge it and then move on past all that. There was a time, there was a saying, if you're white, if you're light, you're all right. If you're black, stand back. Whites didn't say that. We said it. And so, whether it's in the church or in the home, we need to first just flush out all of that stuff. Acknowledge it was done, it was said. Teach our children this is unacceptable and move forward. And when we're praying, and this is something I have to do, when I say, Lord, forgive those who have trespassed against me, the Lord's Prayer, I've got to include whites in that. I can't just make it, the man down the street whose car is always in my way. No, I need to include everybody, and I don't think there's been enough emphasis along those lines. That's just, it's elementary as far as I'm concerned.
Right. So when we think of historically about, and you seem like you're very kind of forward thinking, you're thinking about your ministry, your pastoral work in a much broader context. When we think about kind of pastors of the civil rights era, of course, Martin Luther King Jr., more locally, Reverend Vernon Johns, and of course, Reverend Francis Griffin, very, very much preachers who did not, only did their preaching within the confines of the four walls of the church. Do you think that there's a difference between kind of the pastors from 60, 70, 80 years ago, 100 years ago to now? Because I don't find a lot of pastors who share your sentiment of trying to be a pastor in a broader context. Not to say they don't exist, because I don't think that's true, but certainly, at least from a kind of historical perspective, it seems like there were more, now there are less. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Give me an example. What are you saying here?
Yes, it would help if I actually ask a question, because I'm kind of just talking. I think that there's a notion that faith-based institutions and leaders are less active now than they were in the past. And I was curious to get your idea about that, and if you think that's true, why do you think that is the case? Because there's certainly less examples of the Martin Luther Kings and the Vernons and the...
Exactly, there's no doubt. There's Jesus Christ, there's God, Father, Son, and then there's Martin Luther King. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, right. And certainly I have a lot of respect. I did not know him, and because I wasn't living here at the time, Reverend L. Francis Griffin, but I have always been in awe of the men and women who are part of our civil rights history. I think that on some level, ministers have gotten a little comfortable. Some of them almost act as if the work is finished, and it's not. Without getting too political, I will say that I believe that we're headed for another period of racial friction, more intense than what we think we have now. There's a saying, history repeats itself, and I think the current political situation is indicative of some difficulty we may face, which means that African American ministers had to be very vocal about encouraging their parishioners to get involved in what's going on in their communities. I don't think that there's been enough community activism on the part of African Americans, and I don't think that the pulpit has emphasized. I give an example. When you go to a Board of Supervisors meeting, a school board meeting, how many ministers are there? You know, how many ministers are just convening groups to discuss what are the key issues in the community and represent their parishioners when they talk to the mayor, the city council, or the local council about what is really going on. I think today more than ever, we have to be socially active, and this business about separation of church and state, I respect that thought, and I will do everything I can not to get it all mixed up. However, when you study the life of Christ, while he was very much the Son of God, that did not mean that he wasn't aware of what was going on socially and in terms of the government, and spoke out against it. And I think that there needs to be that today. I think pastors need to be vocal, and we need to come together to support each other in that. I have a group of ministers now that meet on Saturday evenings by phone. We just have 30-minute prayer every Saturday evening, just to encourage each other, just to be there to say, I've got your back. And whatever you need, I'm here to help you in whatever way I can. I think there needs to be more of that than ever before.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a very, very important point. I think you've answered the question I was going to ask, but I think, yes, people need to hear these words and hopefully feel inspired and galvanized to go out and do the work. I guess my last question now will kind of be, what are your, I mean, there's no hierarchy to oppression, right? So there's no, all systemic injustice is systemic injustice. So I don't want to allude to any being more significant than the other, but for you, I mean, we can only, stop my recording. Okay, sorry, I got a call and I cut the recording. What are kind of your, just kind of in terms of your time and your energy and bandwidth, what are kind of some of your priorities and issues, and whether locally or nationally, that need to be fixed, that you kind of really are passionate about? I'm still concerned about the numbers of African Americans who end up in prison. And I am very concerned that the prison system does not rehabilitate, it almost annihilates. The prison system supposedly is, well, on paper it says to rehabilitate. You punish and you rehabilitate. But for African Americans, it's almost annihilation, because there's not enough preparation for employment once they get out, helping them to understand where to look, how to look, what training they're going to need, all that sort of thing, especially where our African American males are concerned. I had 8 brothers. I'm very pro-male. As a matter of fact, I've been accused of always defending the guys. I'll confess, yeah,
I do. I'm always looking. My brothers were my favorites. My sisters got on my last nerve. But I think that we really need to look at our prison system. If we can't have slavery, and I'm just thinking, some twisted mind, we can't have slavery, we'll put them in jail, you know, that sort of thing. So I think that the church, individuals need to really focus on that now. Several years ago, I was invited by a chaplain, one of the prisons here in Southside, to do a revival at a facility in Buckingham. And that was an incredible experience to go into a room with 300 male prisoners who had come out for a worship service. After I got past the freezing moment, I realized how desperately these men needed to be reassured, to be encouraged. So now more than ever, I just want to see the church become active. When someone is released, the church needs to be there. What do you need? How can we help you? The churches need to do some activities in terms of helping people find jobs. That was one of the things I got paid to do by the government, how to help people get their applications put together and all that sort of thing. A lot of the guys, especially coming out of prison, don't have that training. To just kind of pull it all together, that's where I am now. I want to give more assistance and direction to those who are being released from prison. I think that that's what we need to do on a more concentrated level. And keep in mind, you know, there are people who look down their nose at people who've made bad mistakes and got themselves, as we say, got themselves in trouble. But there's a passage of scripture that says, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." I think that there are many of us who didn't go to prison. If our history were totally reviewed, we're not without some shortcomings ourselves. And so we have to get out of this judgmental attitude we have and be there to help our brothers and sisters, our sons and daughters, as they come out and try to get their lives together. So that's my focus now.
Very, very important and a tremendous undertaking amongst all the other issues that there are out there. So that's a passion project of mine as well. And they also even say, like, I think it was very intentional the way the 13th Amendment was worded, right? Like, involuntary servitude is outlawed or whatever the word is, except in case of a crime. Like, it's like then these places all over the country knock up all these misdemeanors to be felonies, and then here's the conflict. Like, it's such an awful system that needs to be worked on.
Exactly.
You've been great, and that's all the questions that I have. But I didn't want to give you a chance. Was there anything else you just wanted to say or to add?
No, I will add that I am thrilled at the work that the Moten Museum does. I served on the board for a brief period of time, and I was just so impressed, and still am. And I know that my being in this part of Virginia and the things that I've been blessed to work on were all part of a divine plan. Even where I live now, it's right across the road from where Vernon Johns had his farm or his home. And the person who I obtained my little piece of land from was a friend of Vernon John's and came to the area because of Vernon John's. So I just feel myself more and more a part of the history of this area. So I'm just thrilled at what Moton has done, is doing, and will yet be doing. I expect to hear extraordinary things about what this institution has done in terms of addressing a horrible decision that was made a number of years ago, but not getting stuck there, moving beyond. And that's where I want to see us go. Not get stuck in the history of the negative, but move forward to the positive results that can come out of it.
Thank you. And that was, that's definitely going to make it in there. All the good stuff that we're doing. But no, we definitely appreciate that. And yeah, I think to echo your sentiment, like, we really try for folks when they come through this exhibit and to the museum to not view this as purely a story of victimization and struggle and oppression, but a story of resilience, right? Because
that's exactly right.
The community here were not passive actors in this story. Every time something happened, they fought back, they advocated, they remained strong in their faith, and that allowed them to persevere. It's a story of perseverance and resilience, even more so than the story of struggle and discrimination and oppression. And I think that you hit that nail right on the head.
I'm glad. I'm excited about what you're doing, and I think the best is yet to come. I think once we get past the generational embarrassment, anger, fear, all those negatives, and start really focusing on who we are, kings and queens. We are descendants of kings and queens. And we allowed ourselves to be convinced early on that we had no value. I remember doing a workshop. I was working at Longwood, and I was invited to do a Black History program at a school over in one of the counties, Lunenburg County, I think. And I began to talk about the Black generals in history. Nobody knew that they were Hannibal. They didn't know he was a Black man. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, was a Black man. I've just rolled all that out. And the kids were sitting there, their eyes big as saucers. When I got back to work, I found that the vice principal or someone had called Longwood to complain that I had come over there and was riling the kids up.
Sometimes they need to be riled up.
But if I were to ask even some of our adults today, our parents, who was one of the greatest generals who ever lived, very few of them would realize it was a Black man.
Right.
And that even today, some of his military acumen is still being, copied. They don't know that. When I throw out, I talk to people about wealth. We have been described as a bunch of poor Black folk, and we don't have a lot of money, but it's only because we haven't used the resilience and the creativity. Because where's all the wealth in the world? Africa. The diamond mines, the oil. I mean, is that an accident or coincidence that God would have a group of people come from an area where all the wealth is? I don't think so. It's just so many, when you have those kind of discussions, and I think there needs to be more. That's why I admire what you're doing, because whether the viewers agree with me or any of the other persons who, at least it's out there, let's talk about it. Being willing to discuss differences of opinion and understand you may look at it one way, I look at it another, but let's listen to each other and see what happens.